about yourself and how did you start to work with RPGs?
I first got into the RPG industry through Paizo's RPG Superstar contest back in 2008. This was an open contest where people could design different little things through rounds, and it was the fans then voted on what they wanted to, and each round it limited or took out some of the people in the competition, and the winner would get to write an adventure for Paizo. I didn't win the contest, but I was one of the top 4 finalists, which meant that I got to Paizo came and asked me to do some freelance work. So I started writing freelance for Paizo, and eventually I applied for a job here, first as a developer on Pathfinder, and then I moved over to Starfinder as a developer, and finally the creative director for Starfinder.
Okay. In relation to older RPGs that have tried to do space opera-based RPGs like D&D and things like that, what makes Starfinder different than those past attempts?
I think one of the things that makes, or the biggest thing that separates Starfinder from other science fiction games that have been out there is really the science fantasy aspect. We fully embrace the science fantasy. It's not just space opera, it's not just fantasy. We want wizards in space, we want magic lasers, holy plasma cannons, we want starships, we want cyborg dragons. Basically, everything you can do mixing the fantasy and the science fiction together as much as possible.
Great. Even though Starfinder is in the same universe as Pathfinder, the core races are all space opera flavored, and only in the appendix the classic fantasy races are presented. It's clear the desire to allow 2 diverse kinds of game, the science fiction and the fantasy science fiction. How was it to work with these 2 different games, or 2 different genres? And what took you to choose this line of work?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some big differences. For me, it's, I worked on Pathfinder, so when we decided to do Starfinder, I first was helming the adventures, the adventure path, which is what I had done on Pathfinder. And so it's just this sort of, we wanted them to be 2 separate games. Pathfinder is very fantasy, but Starfinder is science fantasy. So it's putting that science fiction flavor on, mixing it in with the fantasy, like I said before.
Paizo has proved that storyline and epic campaigns are as important as rule supplements. The second adventure path for Starfinder is a 3-part campaign instead of the classic 6-part format. Some people say that it's because Starfinder is quite more experimental than usual. Is that true? Will there be any difference between the scale of how epic things can get?
I think there is some truth to the fact that we can be more experimental with Starfinder. Pathfinder's been out for a while, and a lot of things, the format has been decided for a while, but Starfinder's new, and it kind of gives us the chance to try out some new things. So, for instance, with our adventure paths, which are normally 6 volumes, or historically have been 6 volumes in Pathfinder, we can look at Starfinder and say, you know what, let's see what happens if we do a 3-part AP. What happens if we start an adventure path at a higher level than first? And it really depends on how our fans accept that, for whether, how successful that is. But it does give us the opportunity to try new things, while at the same time we can still tell these really big epic stories. I mean, we have a whole galaxy to play with, so there's tons of great stories that we can tell, and you can tell in your games as well.
Working in a project of such size as Starfinder can be very stressful, but also very fun. What was the best part about working with this game, and what are some challenges?
For me, the best part of working on Starfinder is getting to mix these 2 things that I love, fantasy and science fiction, together. I've always played fantasy games like Pathfinder, but I've read a lot more. I've always enjoyed reading science fiction and thinking about the future. So being able to mix those 2 together on a daily basis in a fun game in ways that I've never seen before is really what's the most fun. In terms of challenging, it's the thing, we're a game company, but we're a publishing company, and so we always have deadlines. And there's a saying that no game is ever finished; it's just until somebody takes it away from you. And I think that's true for us too. We always want to keep working on the game, but we've got to print those books and move on to the next product.
Some people are going to say that Starfinder is only a Pathfinder in space. Do you agree? And what do you have to say about that?
There are some similarities between Pathfinder and Starfinder. Starfinder is built on the sort of the basic game that Pathfinder had, but it's a lot more than just Pathfinder in space. We had to create a bunch of new rules. For example, starships don't exist in Pathfinder at all, of course, but are a key part of Starfinder. And it's the same pretty much all the way through. We have 7 new races, alien races that you can play. We have new classes, so sort of some of the basic rules are the same, but everything else has been sort of updated and done for a game that takes place in the future.
Would you say that Starfinder improves on Pathfinder?
I think it does in some ways, but it's nothing about that Pathfinder needs improvement. It's that a good example would be in Pathfinder, melee combat is a lot more common as people run up and hit things with swords. And while you can do that in Starfinder, a lot more people have laser pistols, and so things happen at range a lot more often. So there's different focuses on different aspects of the game in Starfinder than there are in Pathfinder. But it's very much Starfinder is its own game separate from Pathfinder.
To finish off, what were the major references for I'm guessing maybe influences? What are the major influences for the Pact World setting? And what would be Starfinder Appendix N?
The Pact World setting is kind of the core of our setting, and that comes out of those planets were originally created for Pathfinder, but there's a lot of inspiration taken from sort of the pulp fiction era. We have a red planet called Akaton, which is which is peopled by aliens. There's a jungle planet that's closer to the sun called Castrovel, which is very much like the fantasy Venus. So we've taken a lot from these old sources, but there's a ton of inspirations that everyone that's worked on the game has, whether it's Star Wars, Star Trek, The Expanse. We have a whole section, 2 pages in the back of our core rulebook that lists a lot of these inspirations from movies and films and anime and books. There's really too many to list here.
And any final words?
Thanks, and enjoy the game.
Perfect.